So at the end of the day, this guy gets a bright idea. My son knows what's going on. My son will tell me what's going on. That guy's name was Billy Hines. He owned a store called Royal Sounds in the Lauderhill Mall, Fort Lauderdale. As a result, he started a record label called Foresight. He had the foresight to know what's going on and how to manipulate it. Foresight Records had the luxury of knowing Frank Cornelius. Now, those of you who even know oldies music, you don't have to know music history, are well aware of the Cornelius brothers and Sister Rose. Too Late to Turn Back Now and Treat Her Like a Lady. Two of the biggest hits UA Records had in the 70s. Came out of that area. Frank Cornelius is the youngest brother of that family. So when Billy Hines knew Frank Cornelius, let's hire him to make some music. He knows how to make music. He can work a drum machine and lay things to tape and have a little success making some throwaway rap records. But the difference between these throwaway rap records and the Michael Sterling, Joe Gibbs era is those were adults. Now you got a 15-year-old, 14-year-old kid in the mix, 14-year-old kid in the mix saying good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. That's key. Ear to the ground. All of his friends came up to the Royal Sounds record store after school, listened to records. ADE would play them in the store, let's test them out, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad. He knew what was good. Billy Hines said, let's trust my son. My son knows what's going on. Frank, make something like he says. Frank, do this. Frank, do that. Frank was a masterful musician of a great family of hit records. They could do it. Cry the City was shut down, but that's okay. Foresight Records doesn't need to shut down. They can keep going. Foresight Records transitions South Floridian youth music to being youth music made by adults to youth music being dictated by the youth. We've come into our own. This is our era. Foresight Records was ushering in our era. And we do have to thank Adrian Hines for being the ear to the ground at the age of 14. We have to thank Billy Hines for being the financier, the guy who had the vision. We have to thank Frank Cornelius for being the guy who made these records, who figured out how to take his old school music sensibilities into the present of 1984, the Cry of the City era, and breaking and Beat Street and break dancing. And he did, and they did, and they had hits. Beefbox, FS01 forward, they've had hit records. Now, DXJ was the local guy working independently, and he approached Billy Hines and said, listen, can I make a record for you guys? And they said, yes. What do you have in mind? I want to make a song, and we'll call it by Magatronics, and we'll call it Radio Mars. All right, let's record it. You get together with Frank. Listen, my son's going to come to the studio with you because he knows the sound, he knows the youth market. Let's see what happens. They record the song, Radio Mars. They start to present it. For no reason, cut. For whatever reason, the record is pulled. Nobody knows why, and there's been some debate. And I've certainly interacted with both parties involved there. Adrian Hines, who was advising the record. DXJ, who was producing the record. It was pulled. FS03, Foresight 03, Renard with No Regard. Which hit, which did alright. That becomes a question we have to ask ourselves through this history, because when we talk about Miami bass, who was the first person to say Miami bass? Who said the bass that ate Miami? That was DXJ. So he certainly knew the formula. He certainly was there from day one. And it raises a lot of questions that I will let those two parties answer over time. Those two parties will certainly answer that question over time. Now, Pretty Tony continues on. Pretty Tony is a cog in this industry because he's well financed and he's got a lot of collaborators and he's good at what he does. He's certainly earned his right. He hits with Don't Stop the Rock. He hits with Party Just Begun in 84 and Don't Stop the Rock in 85. Pretty Tony becomes, or I shouldn't say becomes, Pretty Tony remains central focus to Miami music. Now, at this point, I already lived in Florida, so I was well aware that he was homegrown. But he was definitely hitting outside. Again, I heard him initially in the Detroit area, so that was a big deal. Pretty Tony steps it up a notch. He records a song called "It's Automatic." Now this changes things a bit. "It's Automatic" gets marketed in a way that most people don't market. Because cable was still such a new entity at the time. It's a product of the 70s, flourished a bit in the 80s, but people were still confused about it. "It's Automatic" was marketed through Dance Party USA, one of the earliest teen dance shows on cable. You know, ripping off the old American Bandstand formula on cable. And Byron and Garfield go on to Dance Party USA and represent the song and sing or lip sync the song. And it's more known now on the internet than Pretty Tony records themselves, thanks to YouTube. So it was a big deal. But it certainly heightened the awareness of the Pretty Tony establishment. Sherman Neely, Tony, Byron Garfield, Debbie Deb, Trinier. We have to ask ourselves, what happens to Pretty Tony after this in 1986? He doesn't have a whole lot of hits for a little while, and he's certainly upfront about saying he was arrested. If I understand the history correctly, he was arrested in Atlanta, the Omni Hotel. When I questioned him, he said, "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time." So, can't question that. It certainly says something about 1986. Morris Levy, also indicted in 1986 as part of the mob. He was doing, which is well established, some cutout bin schemes and racketeering and putting some muscle on some people that he shouldn't have been putting muscle on while he was being tapped by the FBI. And he took a fall. And Morris Levy left the country while indicted. Pretty Tony went to jail. And this raises a lot of questions.